Hello, everyone, and good morning, and welcome to a live edition of Uncivil Law. I hope you are well. This is going to be today's story for Uncivil Law. The President of the United States has written a letter to the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, yesterday evening, and with the U.S. House set to vote on impeachment sometime later today, and I'm sure they will vote to approve it because we all know how this was going to end before it ever started. Um, we will read this letter and see what it has to say. And as I say, the U.S. House is going to vote on this later today. I believe at least two Democrats have announced, as I recall, that they're not going to vote in favor of it. I think one Democrat has said that they're not going to vote in favor to the degree they're switching parties and becoming Republicans, so that's fun. It has been speculated that somewhere between 2 and 12 Democrats may not vote to impeach because they live in, districts where that would not be favorable. It does not look right now like any Republicans are going to vote in favor of it, but I guess we will see as it goes on. And then it will go over to the Senate to do what they're going to do. And right now, both Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham are saying that they're going to punt. They're going to let the U.S. House present its case and then vote and be done with it. So we will see if that actually happens, and we will cover more of it when it gets over to the Senate because we'll have something resembling a trial, and so something for us more to comment on. But for now, without further ado, it is time for the letter. Very super exciting. So let's get started with this. From the White House, dated yesterday, December the 17th, 2019, to the Speaker of the House, the Honorable Nancy Pelosi, Washington, D.C. Dear Madam Speaker, I write to express my strongest and most powerful protest against the partisan impeachment crusade being pursued by the Democrats in the House of Representatives. This impeachment represents an unprecedented and unconstitutional abuse of power by Democratic lawmakers, unequaled in nearly 2.5 centuries of American legislative history. The articles of impeachment introduced by the House Judiciary Committee are not recognizable under any standard of constitutional theory, interpretation, or jurisprudence. They include no crimes, no misdemeanors, and no offenses whatsoever. You have cheapened the importance of the very ugly word impeachment. So I'm guessing from the switch of tone here, this was written in part by someone else and then annotated and edited by the president, because that last sentence seems something like President Trump would directly write, and the previous sentence not so much. So just we'll see if we could parse out which sentences were actually written by the president, which weren't, right? By proceeding with your invalid impeachment, you are violating your oaths of office. You are breaking your allegiance to the Constitution, and you're declaring open war on the American democracy. You dare to invoke the Founding Fathers in pursuit of this election nullifying scheme, yet your spiteful actions display unfettered contempt for the American founding, and your egregious conduct threatens to destroy that which our founders pledged their very life to build. Even worse than offending the Founding Fathers, you are offending Americans of faith by continually saying, I pray for the president, when you know this statement is not true, unless it's meant in a negative sense. That's a terrible thing you are doing, but you'll have to live with it, not I. Ooh. Your first claim, abuse of power, is completely disingenuous, meritless, and baseless invention of your imagination. You know that I had a totally innocent conversation with President Ukraine. I love how he's still using that language, like totally innocent. That's just, I appreciate him sticking to his own rhetoric. I have to admire that. I then had a second conversation that has been misquoted, mischaracterized, and fraudulently misrepresentative. Fortunately, there was a transcript of the conversation taken, and you know from the transcript was immediately made available that the paragraph in question was perfect. Again, with that language, perfect. We've seen him describe his own call as perfect before. Nice to know he's sticking to his own analysis, I guess. I said to President Zelensky, I'd like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been a lot and through a lot, and Ukraine knows a lot about it. I said, do us a favor, not me, and our country, not a campaign. I then mentioned the Attorney General of the United States. Every time I talk with a foreign leader, I put America's interests first, just as I did with President Zelensky. Very exciting. You are turning a policy disagreement between two branches of government into an impeachable offense. It is no more legitimate than the executive branch charging members of Congress with crimes for the lawful exercise of legislative power. Well, as to that sentence with charging members of Congress for crimes of lawful exercise of constitutional power, let us consult the Constitution. Article 1, Section 6 says in relevant part that the representatives shall, in all cases except treason, felony, and breach of peace, be privileged from arrest during their attendance at session of their respective houses and in going to and returning from the same, and for any speech or debate in either house they shall not be questioned in any other place. So there is some immunity for the acts of Congress because we don't want to interfere with, them doing their job. So, if you were to arrest them, just saying, you're hitting some constitutional issues there. You know full well that Vice President Biden used his office and $1 billion of U.S. aid money to coerce Ukraine into firing the prosecutor who is digging into the company paying his sons millions of dollars. You know this because Biden bragged about it on video. Biden openly stated, I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I looked at them and said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch, he got fired. Even Joe Biden admitted just a few days ago in an interview with NPR that it looked bad. Now you're trying to impeach me by falsely accusing me of doing what Joe Biden has admitted he actually did. You can judge for yourselves how parallel it is or not with the current situation, but, we did see the video with respect to that where Biden was saying these things. The U.S. had said they're going to give $1 billion. So the situation at least kind of parallel, right? This is money that Congress had allocated. It's money that a member of the executive branch was saying they're going to withhold unless they perform certain actions. The degree to which you think they're parallel or not, is an issue for your own judgment, but there is a situation there that one might want to analyze and determine whether or not it's parallel, and if it differs, why, and what the differences are. So, there's something there to be said. That's a fair point. President Zelensky has repeatedly declared I did nothing wrong and that there was no pressure. Why is no pressure capitalized? For no reason. He further emphasized that it was a good phone call, that I don't feel pressure, and explicitly stated that nobody pushed me. The Ukrainian foreign minister stated very clearly, I've never seen a direct link between investigations and security assistance. He also said there was no pressure. Did he say it in capitalization, I wonder? Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, a supporter of Ukraine who met privately with President Zelensky, has said, at no time during this meeting was there any mention by Zelensky or any Ukrainian that they were feeling pressure to do anything in return for the military aid. Many meetings have been held between representatives of Ukraine and our country. Never once did Ukraine complain about feeling pressure being applied. Not once. Ambassador Zolan testified, I told him, no quid pro quo. I want nothing. I want nothing. I want President to do the right thing, do what he ran on. Exciting. The second claim, the so-called obstruction of Congress, is preposterous and dangerous. House Democrats are trying to impeach the duly elected President of the United States for asserting constitutionally based privileges that have been asserted on a bipartisan basis by administrations of both political parties throughout the United States. Well, President Trump does have a fair point there. The executive branch saying no to the legislative branch and the legislative branch saying no to the executive branch is, a tale old as time, right? The executive branch telling certain people not to testify before Congress or not to give certain documentation before Congress is in no way a new problem or a new issue. This has certainly been something that's happened before where the president or members of the executive branch have refused to testify. As I said in a prior video, the example comes immediately to mind would be the Fast and Furious scandal with Department of Justice and the alcohol, tobacco, firearms division, where they were doing a gun running scheme as part of a method to try to trace firearms to Mexican cartels. And it went wrong insofar as the guns were used to kill U.S. law enforcement personnel, and the executive branch denied the information to Congress at the time, and he was held in contempt of Congress at the time. I'm talking about Eric Holder, the then Attorney General, was held in contempt. So yes, this has been a thing, and it goes into separation of powers. So this is not necessarily legitimate when they're talking about constitutional-based privileges. This is what they're talking about. Talking about separation of powers. You know, the executive branch and the legislative branch are co-equal branches, and so they're always fighting about who has what privileges to do what and under what circumstances. So not exactly a new problem. Under that standard, every American president would have impeached many times over. He has a fair point. As liberal law professor Jonathan Turley warned when addressing congressional Democrats, I can't emphasize this enough. If you impeach a president, if you make it a high crime and misdemeanor out of going to the courts, it's an abuse of power. It's your abuse of power. You're doing precisely what you're criticizing the president for doing. And I mean, fair in so much as by asking the courts to adjudicate the matter, you know, that's one of the ways you typically resolve when there's issues on a subpoena, for example. You know, either you go to quash or the other party goes to compel. So, you know, if someone wants to refuse, excuse me, if someone doesn't want to respond to a subpoena, then that person can move to quash, or I suppose they can wait and for the other party to move to compel and fight it on the back end. But either way, getting the courts to adjudicate the lawfulness of the subpoena is something that, of course, can be done. So that's a fair point. All right. Everyone, including you, knows what's really happening. Your chosen candidate lost the election in 2016 in Electoral College landslide, 306 to 227, and you and your party have never recovered from this defeat. You have developed a full-fledged case of what many in the media call Trump derangement syndrome. Nice. And sadly, you'll never get over it. You're unwilling and unable to accept the verdict issued at the ballot box during the great election of 2016. So you've spent 3 straight years attempting to overturn the will of the American people and nullify their votes. You view democracy as your enemy. Speaker Pelosi, you admitted just last week at a public forum that your party's impeachment efforts have been going on for 2.5 years, long before you ever heard about the phone call with Ukraine. Because I read this in advance, I have prepped. Let's listen to what she actually said so you can judge for yourself.
One of the biggest criticisms of the process has been the speed at which the House Democrats are moving. If this is, but seriously though, seriously.
It's been going on for 22 months, okay? 2.5 years, actually.
There has been some criticism, though, I will say, about whether or not you should move forward before the end of the year or wait for the courts. Why do you think now is the time to move?
Well, I think we're not moving with speed. This, was it 2.5 years ago that they initiated the Mueller investigation?
So with that being said by her, you can judge for her by yourself. Based on what she actually said, you can judge for yourself whether she was referring to impeachment going on for 2.5 years as an effort. And I think it's at least a plausible characterization because, of course, as we all know, there was lots of talk about impeaching over what Mueller was investigating. So, you know, you can judge for yourself whether that was what she was talking about or not. 19 minutes after I took the oath of office, the Washington Post published a story headlined, "The campaign to impeach President Trump has begun." I mean, that's, you know, kind of a thing. 19 minutes, say, let's impeach the president. I mean, that's, you know. Less than 3 months after my inauguration, Representative Maxine Waters stated, "I'm going to fight every day until he's impeached." House Democrats introduced the first impeachment resolution against me within months of my inauguration for what would be regarded as one of our country's best decisions, the firings of James Comey, see the Inspector General report, who the world now knows as one of the dirtiest cops our nation has ever seen. A ranting and raving Congresswoman, Rashida Tlaib, declared just hours after she was sworn into office, "We're going to get in there and we're going to impeach the MF." Representative Al Green said in May, "I'm concerned that if we don't impeach this president, he will get reelected." Again, you and your allies said and did all these things long before you ever heard of President Zelensky or anything related to Ukraine. As you know very well, this impeachment drive has nothing to do with Ukraine or the totally appropriate conversation I had with its new president. It only has to do with your attempt to undo the election of 2016 and steal the election of 2020. Joey D, why am I treating it as a law item? Well, I mean, it's a letter from the President of the United States regarding impeachment, and impeachment is the talk of the town, so I'm covering it because it's topical. I mean, it's a letter written yesterday, so it's topical, and that's why I'm covering it today. And the impeachment vote's happening today, so why not? You know. Congressman Adam Schiff cheated and lied all the way up to the present day, even go so far as to fraudulently make up out of thin air my conversation with President Zelensky of Ukraine and read this fantasy language to Congress as though they're said by me. And once again, because I prepped, I have this for you to listen to so you can judge for yourself.
The essence of what the president communicates. We've been very good to your country, very good. No other country has done as much as we have. But you know what? I don't see much reciprocity here. I hear what you want. I have a favor I want from you, though. And I'm going to say this only 7 times, so you better listen good. I want you to make up dirt on my political opponent, understand lots of it. On this and on that. I'm going to put you in touch with people, and not just any people. I'm going to put you in touch with Attorney General of the United States, my Attorney General, Bill Barr. He's got the whole weight of the American law enforcement behind him. And I'm going to put you in touch with Rudy. You're going to love him, trust me. You know what I'm asking, and so I'm only going to say this a few more times, in a few more ways. And by the way, don't call me again. I'll call you when you've done what I asked. This is, in sum and character, what the president was trying to communicate with the president of Ukraine. It would be funny if it wasn't such a graphic betrayal of the president's oath of office. But as it does represent a real betrayal, there's nothing the president says here that is in America's interest, after all. It is instead the most consequential.
So, yeah, that was what was read by Adam Schiff, and a lot of those statements, of course, were not in the phone call. He later would go on to say that it was a parody, but at the time, it was read as you heard it, so it seemed serious. So, a lot of things not there reflected in the transcript, so that's what they were referring to. And, you know, Joey D, if you want to watch a Trump rally and see the same thing, then watch a Trump rally and see the same thing. You know, I want to cover it because it's topical. So, you know, watch something else, I guess. Let's see, where were we? His shameless lies and deceptions dating all the way back to the Russia hoax is one of the main reasons we're here today. You and your party are desperate to distract from the American extraordinary economy, incredible job boom, record stock markets, soaring confidence, and flourishing citizens. Your party simply cannot compete with our record. 7 million new jobs, the lowest ever unemployment for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Asian Americans, a rebuilt military, a completely reformed VA with choice and accountability for our great veterans. I'm not sure how completely reformed the VA is. You know, I think a lot of people would quibble with that. More than 170 new federal judges and 2 Supreme Court justices. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that like a quarter of the entire federal bunch has now been appointed by Trump. You know, he gets all the highlight for the 2 Supreme Court justices, but, As most lawyers know, 98% of law happens at the Court of Appeals. Because most cases don't get appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. So it's probably way more significant for the 170 judges they appointed, excluding the Supreme Court justices. So it's a big deal. Historic tax and regulation cuts, the elimination of the individual mandate, the first decline in prescription drug prices in a half century, the first new branch of the United States military since 1947, the Space Force, which doesn't really exist, but okay. Strong protections of the Second Amendment, criminal justice reform, a defeated ISIS caliphate, and killing of the world's #1 terrorist, al-Baghdadi, the replacement of the disastrous NAFTA trade deal with the wondrous USMCA, Mexico and Canada. How different the two deals are is questionable. And I wouldn't describe NAFTA as necessarily disastrous, but that's my subjective opinion. A breakthrough phase 1 trade deal with China, massive new trade deals with Japan and South Korea, withdrawal from the terrible Iran nuclear deal, which I would argue has made striking a deal with North Korea somewhat harder as a result, but okay. Cancellation of the unfair and costly Paris Climate Accord, which, is itself just optional. There's no mandatory language in the accord. So the whole thing was pointless because it was aspirational. So it actually had no cost because it didn't require anyone to do anything. Becoming the world's top energy producer, recognition of Israel's capital, opening the American embassy in Jerusalem, and recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, a colossal reduction in illegal border crossings. I don't know how true that is, but okay. The ending of catch and release, which would be the keeping of people in camps who are trying to immigrate over here, which of course has been controversial. And the building of the southern border wall, and that's just the beginning. There's so much more. You cannot defend your extreme policies, open borders, mass migration, high crime, crippling taxes, socialized healthcare, destruction of American energy, late-term taxpayer-funded abortions, which is still illegal because I think it's the Hyde Amendment, if the naming reminds me correctly, but I believe it's the Hyde Amendment, where it is not legal for taxpayer money to be used to fund abortion, so I don't know what that refers to. Elimination of the Second Amendment, radical far-left theories of law and justice, and constant partisan obstruction of both common sense and common good. Very exciting. Theo says, hi, Uncivil Law. Greetings from a civil law fan from Switzerland. Hello, Theo. Nice for you to have us here. Yeah. I don't think anyone, if anyone is expecting President Trump to be convicted in the Senate, no. I seriously doubt there will be a Republican vote in the Senate. So, no. You'd have to get 20 votes. 20 Republican votes. Not happening. Of course, that does assume every single one of them is showing up for the vote, which I think is fair assumption, but yeah. There's nothing I'd rather do. There's nothing I'd rather do than stop referring to your party as the do-nothing Democrats. Unfortunately, I do not know that you'll ever give me the chance to do so. I mean, the House has written and passed a fair amount of legislation. The Senate hasn't considered it for political reasons, but do nothing is a little, But it's a jab. That's fine. It's a political jab. After 3 years of unfair and unwarranted investigations, $45 million spent, 18 angry Democratic prosecutors, nice touch. The entire force of the FBI, headed by the leadership, now proven to be totally incompetent and corrupt, you have found nothing. Few people in high position could have endured or passed this test. You do not know, nor do you care, the great damage and hurt you have investigated upon democratically elected President of the United States, and you're doing it yet again. Nightwind, when you say 50% of Republicans, when asked privately, said they'd vote for it, I mean, who knows if that's, I don't know what that source is. I don't know how they're getting that information. And I don't know how true that is. So, and it's not going to be a closed ballot, so. And nor should it be, right? Because it's political. The entire process is political. The consequences are political. So the idea of having a closed ballot doesn't really make sense because it's a political process. So you should have political accountability, right? Impeachment, as I've said many, 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 many times, Impeachment is political, not legal. So all the consequences are political. The entire process is political. So the idea of a secret vote doesn't, to my mind, fully make sense because it's a political process. Therefore, there should be political accountability. If the people vote in a way that the constituents don't want, then they could vote them out of office. That's a political check. That's a valid political check. People, the representatives and senators should presumably be representing their people. That's why they were elected, right? So if they're voting based on the fact that they would not be reelected, then they're voting the way their constituents want. So that's a political ramification to a fundamentally political process. So I don't really see the problem fundamentally because it's political, not legal. I've said on this channel many times before, I've said, as far as I'm concerned, legally, the way I read the Constitution, legally, the House can impeach for literally any reason it wants. The House is the sole judge of what a high crime and misdemeanor is, and the Senate is the sole judge of whether to convict or not. So legally, they can do anything they want. Politically, it's political. So that's where we are. There are not many people who could have taken impeachment inflicted during this period of time, and yet done so much for the success of America and its citizens. But instead of putting our country first, you have decided to disgrace our country still further. You have completely failed with the Mueller report because there was nothing to find, and so you've decided to take the next hoax that came along, the phone call with Ukraine, even though it was a perfect call. And by the way, when I speak to foreign countries, there are many people with permission listening on both sides of the conversation. Yeah, as you would expect. The ambassadors are probably there. Translators are probably there. National security advisors are there. A whole bunch of people are on the calls, right? You would expect that. You are the ones interfering with America's elections. You are the ones subverting America's democracy. You are the ones obstructing justice. You are the ones bringing pain and suffering to our republic with their own selfish personal, political, and partisan gain. Very super exciting. Before it was the impeachment hoax, it was the Russian witch hunt. I mean, he has a point. He has a point. Against all evidence and regardless of truth, you and your deputies claim that my campaign colluded with Russian. A grave, malicious, and slanderous lie, a falsehood like no other. Ooh. You forced our nations throughout turmoil and turmoil over a wholly fabricated story, illegally purchased from a foreign spy by Hillary Clinton and the DNC in order to assault our democracy. That would be referring to the Steele dossier. Whether it was illegally purchased or not is questionable. But, it could be viewed as a campaign finance violation and, so depending on your points of view. So, yeah, that's a whole thing unto itself we can analyze sometime. Yet when the monstrous lie was debunked and this democratic conspiracy dissolved into dust, you did not apologize. You did not recant. You did not ask to be forgiven. You showed no remorse, no capacity for self-reflection. Really? Really, President Trump, you would accuse others of lacking capacity for self-reflection, really? Okay. Instead, you pursued your next libelous and vicious crusade. You engineered an attempt to frame and defame an innocent person. All this was motivated by personal political calculation. Yeah, it probably is. I mean, you would be hard-pressed to disagree that because the process is political, that politics haven't been factored into this. You'd be hard-pressed to disagree that the Democrats, in doing this, don't believe it's to their political advantage, regardless of what else they think. So, they have calculated this to be to their political advantage. Personally, I think they're wrong, but that was their calculation. We'll see how it turns out, I guess. Your speakership and your party are held hostage by your most deranged and radical representatives on the far left. I mean, from a right-wing kind of person like myself, because I am right-wing, I do tend to agree with that. By the way, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm a Trump fan. I didn't vote for him, by the way. I voted third party for whatever it's worth. But I am right-wing. And so, it does feel like the left is being held by its hostage by its most left-leaning elements. So I do share that point. Each one of your members lies in fear of a socialist primary challenger. That's what's driving impeachment. Look at Congressman Nadler's challenger. Look at yourselves. Do not take the country down with your party. Very excited. If you truly cared about freedom and liberty for our nation, then you'd not be devoting your vast investigative resources to exposing the full truth concerning the FBI's horrifying abuses of party power before, during, and after the 2016 election, including the use of spies against my campaign, the submission of false evidence to the FISA court, which I do understand that has happened. We just had that Inspector General's report, right, about some of that FISA stuff. Yeah, that's. I think I probably need to cover the Inspector General report on this channel in a later video. We definitely need to cover that because, yeah. And concealment of exculpatory evidence in order to frame the innocent. The FBI has been great and honorable people, but the leadership was inept and corrupt. I would think you'd personally be appalled by these revelations because in your press conference the day you announced impeachment, you tied the impeachment effort directly to the completely discredited Russia hoax, declaring twice, all roads lead to Putin, which you know is an abject lie. Ooh. I've been far tougher on Russia than President Obama ever thought to be. Well, that's, we did arm troops in opposition to Russia, so. And, President Trump did get caught on that mic with that one incident against, who was it? The president of Russia, whose name I forget. Not Putin. Putin's president, right? So the prime minister of Russia. Again, Dmitriev or something like that, where he got caught saying, I can give you more flexibility after the next election. So, there's that. Any member of Congress who votes in support of impeachment against every shred of truth, fact, evidence, and legal principle is showing how deeply they revile the voters and how truly they detest American constitutional order. Our founders fear the tribalization of party politics, and you're bringing their worst fears to life. Again, I think that, you may have had some part in this with the partisan politics, with some of your rhetoric could be viewed as feeding tribalization rather than countering tribalization. So, to the extent you're concerned about tribalization in politics, a little bit more self-reflection probably be warranted because I think you may be driving that in some respects. Worse still, I've been deprived of basic constitutional due process from the beginning of this impeachment scam right up until the present. I've been denied the most fundamental rights afforded by the Constitution, including the right to present evidence, to have my own counsel present, to confront accusers, and to call and cross-examine witnesses like the so-called whistleblower who started this entire hoax with the false report of the phone call that bears no relationship to the actual phone call made. It's my understanding that I haven't been following it super closely in the House, I admit. I'll follow it a lot more closely on the Senate side when we get something that resembles a trial. But it's my understanding that the chairman has denied the Republicans' request to call witnesses, including the whistleblower. So that is my understanding of the facts, yes. Once I presented the transcribed phone call, which surprised and shocked the fraudsters. They never thought such evidence would be presented. The so-called whistleblower and the second whistleblower disappeared because they got caught. Their report was a fraud, and they were no longer going to be made available to us. In other words, once the phone call was public, your whole plot blew up, but that didn't stop you from continuing. Fun times. More due process was afforded to those accused of the Salem witch trials. That's a cute line. That's a cute line, yeah. Good times. You and others on your committees have long said impeachment must be bipartisan. That's true. If you go back and listen to the statements from the Democrats during the impeachment trial of Clinton, there were quite a few statements from Nadler and Pelosi at the time who said that impeachments must be bipartisan to be legitimate. So, fair point. You said it was very divisive. It certainly is. Far more than you ever thought possible, and it will only get worse. Great. This is nothing more than an illegal, partisan attempted coup that will, based on recent sentiment, fail badly at the voting booth. Well, I wouldn't say it's illegal. It is a legal process. It's in the Constitution. It's spelled out. Now, it's not legal in the sense that of law. So like, this is where like my own language becomes little confusing, because it would be most correct to say it's not legal, but it's lawful, probably, because we can use legal as a word to reserve to legal processes. So if we say it's not legal, but it's lawful, then I would know what I'm talking about, but like no one else would, because I'm trying to separate things that belong to the legal branch of government from things that are lawful, talking cross branches. So it is, strictly speaking, I suppose, not legal. I wouldn't call it illegal. It's, strictly speaking, lawful and political. But no one would know what the difference is. So, okay. This is nothing more than a legal, partisan attempted coup that will, based on recent sentiment, fail badly at the voting booth. You're not just after me as president, you're after the entire Republican Party. That's, well, I mean, that's fair and, you know, obvious, because of course they are. That's like the Democrats' mission in life, right? But because of this colossal injustice, our party is more united than ever been before. That's probably true. I mean, they've dragged people like me into this. So, yeah, it's like, yeah. History will judge you harshly as you proceed with this impeachment charade. Your legacy will be that of turning the House of Representatives from a revered legislative body into a star chamber of partisan persecution. Well, I don't know that President Trump knows what a star chamber is, but I appreciate whoever wrote this from writing it. So I take note that very nice appeal to some of the dirtier points of common law. So very nice touch. I like that. Yeah, Lynn says, very interesting analysis. That's a razor edge colloquially. Yes, it is. That's one of the reasons, like, I would never, like, try to make that distinguishment in writing, because it would not be appreciated by anyone if I wrote lawful versus legal. Like, to everyone else in the world, that means, like, the exact same thing. I could use them two different ways, but, yeah. No one would know what that means. It's fine. I understand this. Perhaps most insulting of all is your false display of solemnity. You apparently have so little respect for the American people that you expect them to believe you're approaching this impeachment somberly, reservedly, and reluctantly. No intelligent person believes what you're saying. I mean, I don't know about no intelligent person, but I have to admit my own biases, and I'm happy to admit my own biases, because that way you can filter my biases as part of what is and is not objective analysis, right? So if I admit my biases to you, then you can factor that in. And I would say, like, I don't believe it. You know, and President Trump himself pointed out why I shouldn't believe it earlier in the letter, when he was talking about how, you know, people have been calling for his impeachment since basically the moment he was elected, and basically before that too. Like, you know, there have been a lot of people calling for his impeachment since day one. And, you know, a lot of people in Congress who've been calling for his impeachment since pretty much day one. So, like, yeah, the fact that, you know, and if you go watch the body language of that when they're announcing it, you watch what seems to me be very suppressed, like, smiles and grins, like when they're saying we're doing it solemnly. I mean, like, no, I don't believe that. So I don't believe it's, yeah, no. Since the moment I won the election, the Democratic Party has been possessed by impeachment fever. Yeah. There's no reticence. This is not a somber affair. You're making a mockery of impeachment, and you're scarcely concealing your hatred of me, other Republican Party, and tens of millions of patriotic Americans. There is a little bit of that, right? Where there does seem to be a little bit of disdain and looking down your nose at the inferior, and yeah, there does seem to be a little bit of that, you know, like elitism aspect of some of this. So I understand that. The voters are wise, and they're seeing straight through this empty, hollow, and dangerous game you're playing. I have no doubt the American people will hold you and Democrats fully responsible in the upcoming 2020 election. They will not soon forgive your perversion of justice and abuse of power. There is far too much that needs to be done to improve the lives of our citizens. It's time for you and the highly partisan Democrats. Well, that's just kind of silly. Of course they're highly partisan Democrats. What's the alternative? You're like, of course they're partisan. That's like, that hurts my brain just a little bit. Of course they're partisan Democrats. Like, you just, like, I don't even understand that sentence. It's like, blows my mind a little bit. It's like, yeah, they're partisan Republicans too. That's the nature of parties. Of course they're partisan. They're Democrats. Of course they're partisan. They're Republican. They belong to parties. Okay, wow. All right, press on. Wow. It's time for you and the highly partisan Democrats in Congress to immediately cease this impeachment fantasy and get back to work for the American people. While I have no expectation that you'll do so, I write this letter for you for the purpose of history and to put my thoughts on permanent and indelible record. Exciting. 100 years from now, when people look back at this affair, I want them to understand it and learn from it so that it can never happen to another American president again. Sincerely yours, Donald Trump. I'm not one to criticize really because my signature has devolved into squiggles too. But yeah, it's not. Yeah, Donald Trump, President of the United States, carbon copy, U.S. Senate, U.S. House. Very, very super exciting. All right, so we have reviewed his letter in full. So what is going to happen later today? Well, the U.S. House is going to vote to impeach him. There's no doubt in anyone's mind. The only doubt is like what the vote's going to be. It doesn't appear any Republicans are going to vote in favor of it. It appears at least 2 Democrats are going to vote against it, including one who has said that they're going to switch parties. The estimates have been somewhere between 2 and 12 Democrats are going to flip their votes. So I suppose we'll see what's going to happen, depending on, And of course, as I point out before, the reason is politics, because they're in very Trump-heavy districts. And so, they're worried about their own political futures, as perhaps they should be, because, again, maybe they should be doing this because the whole thing is political and the judges are political. The ultimate judge of this whole thing is the U.S. people, right? So if they say we don't want him impeached and you vote against it, we're going to vote you out of office. That's political repercussions to a political process. So we'll see how it's going to go. And then it's going to go over to the Senate. And then in January, they're going to sit for, 2 weeks and punt. It looks like what's going to happen. So they're going to have the House managers, as they're called. And I don't know who they're going to be. They'll have to vote who they're going to be. They're going to have the House managers go over there and act like prosecutors and present their case. And then they may just vote immediately after the House is done presenting their case without calling any further witnesses. They've already said they're not going to call witnesses, which they didn't call witnesses in the impeachment trial of Clinton, as memory serves either. They based it on the record. I mean, they could call witnesses, but they're not going to, right? So we'll see what's going to happen. So I will go back and read some of the comments because I've been trying to read 2 different things at once and I missed many of your comments along the way. So I'll go back and read your comments because I love to engage with you now that I've finished here. Let's see. Yeah. You don't need a new ruling. It's already set law, referring back to the issue of when the executive can or cannot respond to congressional orders. I mean, to some degree, that's true, but you still, even where there's precedent, you still have a right to go to court and fight it still, right? So even if there's binding precedent on point, you could go to the court and or have the, you could go to the court and fight it. Now it's a pretty easy decision if there's binding precedent, but you still would want to get the decision applied to you. So whether you're doing the motion to quash or you're fighting on the back end of a motion to compel, either way, you still get the trial court to analyze it. First of all, for any factual differences there might be, and second to the degree there's not, then to enforce it and then to appeal, and then you can do it for no other reason than stalling, but that's part of the judicial process. So if you want to do it that way, you can. Yeah. Yeah, and as Charles Watt pointed out, it's just because the courts ruled on a different administration on the facts of that case, yeah. So the law is, as ever, fact specific, and so there may very well be factual distinguishments here. So you may want to go. So just because you have a court decision, that seems to apply, you still want to go analyze it under the facts to see if it does apply to the situation or not. So that's fair. Let's see. Electoral college is a beautiful thing. Yeah. How long did the Nixon impeachment take? Well, you'd have to judge from when to when. He resigned. The Judiciary Committee voted articles of impeachment, but the House never got a chance to. So Depends when you're counting from where to where in terms of how long Nixon's impeachment. And as Charles Webb pointed out, the 11 months is a reasonable number. Let's see. Yeah, I did love the Trumpist superior being. I agree with you. I did love the Trumpist language as it was appearing in and out, so it was fun. Um, yeah, yeah. Joey D seems to be having issues with me covering this for some reason, but okay. I guess you can't please everyone all the time. I guess I know who my dislike is coming from. That's okay, Joey. I appreciate you coming anyway. Uh, I don't know why he's not being impeached for children caging. Yeah, the caging of children thing is an interesting thing on immigration policy, because it's like you're faced with some real like practical problems on that issue. I don't want to get too deep into it because it's a whole issue in itself. But like, so here's a hypothetical. Hypothetical is you catch an illegal immigrating family crossing the border with small children. They don't want to be deported, so they want to fight deportation, and they may or may not be claiming asylum, and that has to be processed either way. So in that situation, you have a couple options. You can not detain anybody. You can detain just the parents, but not the children, in which case you're separating children from their parents or separating children from their mothers. Or you can keep them all together in the internment, in which case you're caging children, right? So it's like there's no like good solution to this. You either detain no one, which means that, anyone you catch illegally immigrating, you just hope they're going to show up, and if they don't, well, you have no recourse. You detain just the parents, which means you separate the children, and people didn't like that. Or you keep the children and parents together in the detainment, in which case you're caging children. So like the Trump administration is in a no-win scenario on this. They can't do anything that's going to make people happy. The only thing that would make people happy is allowing them to just immigrate freely, and which is in violation of U.S. law. Lest I point out, it is a violation of law to cross the border illegally. So I think it's in 5 USC, but I have to double check. But yeah, so there's the problem with immigration policy. Yeah, if you don't want children in cages, do you want to separate from their parents? In which case, that's abusive on its own right, or do you just want to not detain anyone? So like, yeah, it's a problem. Yeah. Superior Being said Cheeto Hitler needs to be impeached. Very cute. That's fine. Nightwind says, I got friends who served who testified under oath the VA isn't useful to this day. I have no problem believing that, Nightwind. I have no problem believing that the VA is not in any way soft. I would hope it's better, but that's a lot of hope. I mean, the VA has had problems. Let's see. What else? Yeah. Charles Webb pointed out quite correctly, you'll be disappointed when he's impeached. Yeah. And as someone was pointing out that this is probably not the only impeachment of Trump we're going to have. I can see it happening now. I can see into the future. Like Trump might get reelected, and when he does, we're going to have another impeachment. He'll be the only president impeached twice or thrice, depending on where we go. So maybe we'll just do impeachments like every year. It'll just be another thing to do. We'll just do impeachments all the time, right? Good times. It'd be interesting the impeachment curse affects the election and swings things back to Dems. Yeah, I think that's a very likely possibility that the Republicans will pick up swing from this. So, it may energize some of the Democratic base, but they're already energized, and the Republican base is pretty energized too. So, who's it going to wind up swinging more towards in the end? Hard to say, but I think the idea that it helps the Republicans more in the end is, at least from my standpoint, slightly more likely at where I'm sitting right now. Let's see. What else? Clinton wasn't impeached in election year. Clinton was also impeached in his second term. So that was a vastly different thing. No president has ever been impeached in their first term. I'm pretty sure that's correct. No? Was Nixon impeached in his first term? I'd have to double check. I don't think so. So yeah, I think this is a first with impeachment in the first term. Um, yeah, I don't think he was impeached in the second term. I'm pretty sure. Um, what else? Theo points out the ambiguity in common law would have exact conditions in civil law. Fair enough. I don't know much about civil law systems, but yeah, I do understand that they're much more like uh, the actual text of the legislation heavy and less on interpretation. So one of these days, someone's got to teach me about civil law systems so that I can comment on them more intelligently. Which is another good reason to call this channel Uncivil Law, because I don't know much about civil law. Ha ha ha. Let's see what else. Charles West said 2.5 years of Russia, Russia, Russia. Yep. Robert Mueller appointed. Y'all turned the narrative impeachment, impeachment, impeachment. That's, yeah, that does seem a little bit fair. I share your sentiment. Superior Being says the worst part about being a congressman is they have to be elected. They should be appointed for life and voted in line with neoliberal ideology. Secret ballots for everything. Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly, that's my sentiment too. Like the entire process from start to finish of impeachment is political. It's all political. The legal is so thin. You know, the legal is you can impeach for any reason. And like, that's about it. So it just becomes a political question after that. So like, the entire process is political. It shouldn't have political consequences. In the same way, if this were a legal process, it would have legal consequences. So yeah. But this channel does serve as a law review, and impeachment, despite being political, is lawful, if not legal, to coin my distinction. So yes, it's part of the law, right? It's part of the Constitution. It is part of the law. So this is part of the lawful process, if not part of the legal process. So very fun times. Yeah, voting is secret for voters. Yes, it's secret for the end voter. Yes, but not for the politicians. That doesn't make sense. Term limits. Term limits are debatable. You know, the places that have done term limits, it does seem to somewhat more empower interest groups because the politicians don't have as much time. Excuse me, to become experienced because their terms are shorter. And so they tend to rely more on interest groups, that even more so than they do now. And so it does tend to somewhat more empower external interest groups. So, you know, term limits does, and also when you do have term limits, it tends to just be like, you know, nepotism through one measure or another. You know, it's the person's wife, the person's husband, you know, their child. You know, it tends to become more family affair anyway. So like, I'm not so sure how much term limits are helping, and I'm not so sure how much it's really to the benefit, but it's a debatable question. Uh, yeah. It's more the party will not nominate you for your seat. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And look at the House resolutions, my friend. Yeah, the House resolutions are interesting because they don't name like an official crime. Like if you go back to like the Clinton impeachment articles, they go to perjury. Perjury is a crime with actual definitions. They go to obstruction of justice. Obstruction of justice is a crime with actual definitions. Obstruction of Congress is not the same thing as obstruction of justice because you're talking about obstructing one branch versus a different branch. The legislative fighting because the problem is both the legislative and executive branches are political branches. The political powers are split. So the only legal branch we have is the judiciary. The both Congress and the executive are political branches. So anytime they're fighting politics. So when you talk about obstruction of Congress, it's a little bit different because it's one political branch fighting another political branch, as opposed to obstruction of justice, where it's a political branch fighting a legal branch. And so the analysis is a little bit different there as a result. And so when you charge Clinton with obstruction of justice, you know, for lying under oath during the testimony that he gave, for example, And that was something that has an actual legal definition, actual legal elements that you could prove or disprove, as opposed to what they charged Trump with, which, the phrase United States Code, Code of Federal Regulations, executive order never appeared anywhere in this. So it is something that is much more ethereal than, for example, the impeachment of Clinton, where it came with actual crimes with actual definitions. So there is a distinguishment there as well. I don't know how to analyze the articles of impeachment in terms of analyzing them legally. If they had charged him with actual bribery, for example, if they charged him with bribery as an impeachment article, bribery has a definition on the United States Code. So I could actually analyze it under the United States Code, and I could actually look to the elements of bribery, and I could actually say what evidence do we have or not to support each and every element of the charge of bribery. So if they charged him with bribery, that would have been helpful for me because it's something I can analyze as a lawyer. What they've charged him with is not a law. They didn't say you violated a law. They've come up with these political crimes, which is not invalid because high crimes and misdemeanors does seem to speak to some sort of political crimes. And as I was pointing out anyway, because they're the sole judges, they can do anything they want as far as I'm concerned legally. But it's harder for me as a lawyer to analyze because it's so squishy. It's a lot harder to say, well, President Trump is guilty of this and prior presidents are or are not based on some sort of objective analysis. So it is a little frustrating to me on that end. Let's see what else we got. Yeah. The two parties are nothing more than two corporations that are controlling the constitutional republic. We need to abolish the two-party system. If you want to abolish the two-party system, probably the easiest way to do it is come up with some sort of preferential voting system. Maine is experimenting with preferential voting. I know like city council, I think in San Francisco and a couple other places do preferential voting. But the easiest way to abolish the two-party system is to get rid of first past the post voting. This is something I studied when I did my political science degree, because I had a political science degree in addition to a computer science degree. But when I did my political science degree, this is something I studied a lot, was political voting methodologies. And one of the problems with first past the post voting, which we use in America, is it has a tendency of driving everyone into a two-party system. And there's a lot of logical reasons for that. If you came up with a preferential voting system, it would probably go a long way to helping to end the two-party system. And even the parties that would get elected would be different because the nature of people who would won the primaries would be a lot different. That would tend to be more moderating, I would think. I think that if you want to end the two-party system, the easiest way to do that is to support some sort of preferential voting system. There is a charity that does that. Fairvote.org is a good charity for this purpose. So if you want to donate to fairvote.org, they are trying to promote preferential voting. I think it would go a long way for that. Nightwind say they didn't file the proper paperwork to request it. I don't know about that. And maybe that's true. And maybe they thought it would be moot. I don't know enough because I have not been following it that closely on the House side, because the whole House side is just like, it's the equivalent of grand jury. It's like, I'll deal with it on the Senate side. So, Nightwind says, let's throw him in a river, see if he floats. Much simpler. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Impeachment is political. Yes, it is. That's why we need 5 parties. Maybe we do. That's when two started doing stupid. Yep. Trump already lives in the Star Chamber. Cute. We need proportional voting. Won't happen with the Electoral College. Yeah, I'm not sure about proportional voting. I think there's a lot of problems with that. And I also have problem. One of the things Americans like, or at least one of the things I like, is I like the ability to actually vote for my congressman versus voting for a party. So, in other systems, you vote more for the party than for the person. I do like the fact that you actually vote for the person here. And so I don't really like any sort of thing that would take any of that away. So I think the way to fix this is some sort of preferential voting system. It would allow voters to express their preferences much more accurately, and would also go a very long way to ending gerrymandering, because if parties can express a multifaceted vote, how do you gerrymander that? Because it would become much harder, if not impossible, to gerrymander. And the people that would be elected under it would presumably be less likely to gerrymander too, because they'd be more moderate and more able to agree. So, if you want to get rid of gerrymandering, probably the easiest way to do that is by supporting a preferential voting system. So if you want to get rid of, if you want to deal with if you want to lessen partisanship, if you want to lessen gerrymandering, if you want to encourage more civility, if you want to basically encourage term limits because it provides more choices, I think the easiest way to accomplish these goals is by supporting preferential voting. I think it would go a long way to supporting these goals. Yeah. And I finally think I got to the end of the chat. So yes. Riley says, I agree. I'm Australian. We've had preferential voting for at least so long. I understand why Americans are more interested. Americans are just not used to it. Americans haven't heard about it. Americans just have not heard about it. It's not something they're used to. They're used to doing something a particular way. And Maine is the first state to adopt it. And so maybe as Maine, leads the way, more and more states will follow. So like most things have a ripple on effects in America. It's one of the reasons we call the states laboratories of democracy, because they have ripple on effects. A good example of this, by the way, would be like looking at concealed carry permit adoption. So if you go back to, what was it, 1986, 1987? If you go back to 1986, 87, I think there were 3 or 4 states that had concealed carry permits. And those 3 or 4 states had concealed carry permits for like 50 years or something ridiculous. So the map hadn't changed in forever. And then 1986 or 87, Florida was the first modern state to adopt concealed carry permits. And then like you can actually see the map change year after year after year. In fact, let me see if I can find it. I mean, it's a little off point, but why not? It's my stream. Let's do. Let's see if we can find the animated map. Yeah. I love the animated map. It's just interesting to show how the changes. 1986. So you can see how the map changes. Let me see if I can get it so it actually shows the whole thing in one screen. We'll watch the whole thing through. It's just really, really interesting to see how things change. There you go. So you can see the whole map change over time. So it's just really, so when this goes back to 2000, it goes back to 1986. Watch how this changes. Look where the map is in 2019. Okay, look at these colors. Look at 86. No issue, 16. Look, even in the South, if Florida changes, shall issue. And then look how it changes over time. Blue, blue. Look at just how, more blue. See how it spreads? Like that? It changes rapidly. Michigan. Look how much, and then all these red states are no issue. Look, they all disappear. And then these greens are unrestricted. You don't even need a permit. So we're in a whole new category of you don't even need a permit now. We're in green. Look at how that's spreading. Look, it's like half the country now. Look at it again. Look how much is no issue. The entire South is no issue. Look, it's all no issue. Texas, no issue. No concealed carry permits. Texas, none. Florida, look, it changes. You didn't even realize in a blink of an eye, it spreads from state to state. And Vermont over here, which had been long unrestricted for some reason, Vermont was the only unrestricted state. And look, Alaska becomes unrestricted. 2009, Arizona picks it up. Wyoming picks it up. Arkansas picks it up. Nebraska, Maine, Idaho. Look at how the map just changes rapidly. So like, if you think about like Maine as adopting, preferential voting system, maybe something similar could happen here too. Maybe Maine becomes it, and maybe the map changes, and maybe it flourishes just like this concealed carry map does. So like, people don't realize, even 30 years ago, concealed carry, right to carry, was not a thing in the United States. It all changed with Florida. It all changed because mainly of one woman. Her name was Marion Hammer of Florida. She was the woman basically that got the entire country to change effectively, because she's the one that got Florida to pass it in 86. And then you can just see how it spreads as more and more stops adopt it. I bet you didn't know the South was no carry. I bet you didn't know Texas didn't allow concealed carry permits, did you? So just goes to show how things can change over time. I always find that fascinating. Sorry it's a little off point, but it goes to show how things can change very rapidly if someone comes up with an idea. So, anyways. Yeah. The perfect squares in the middle are, what are they? Colorado and, perfect squares, Colorado and, shoot, any maps? Oh, Wyoming. Yeah, Wyoming's the square, and yeah. So you forget your U.S. states, right? Yeah, Wyoming is square. Wyoming and Colorado are the square ones. So there's your U.S. map for all you people who are not from the United States and don't know where different people are. So, yeah. Yeah, very cool. Very cool. Yeah. Anyways, that's the end of the stream. I hope you enjoyed it. If not, that's okay. I understand. Not everyone's going to enjoy all my content, but I've enjoyed it, and I actually have to go to work now at my day job. I'm actually going to be probably 10 minutes late, but that's okay. If you liked this channel, please give it a like, subscribe, all the rest of it. I would appreciate it. And until next time, my friends, I hope you're well. Until later, cheers and goodbye.